hot mess after the U.S. Supreme Court strikes down Trump tariffs. What has happened? Well, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that most of the Trump administration's recent tariffs were illegal. The president has signaled, and especially in a fiery State of the Union, the longest ever, he said that he will keep tariffs. He'll keep using alternative routes. So over to you, Glenn. I mean, we can get into the economics of the chaos that this ruling has caused and Trump's intransigence is calling. But what are the constitutional implications of such a major ruling?
Yes, well, one must focus on the economics and the politics. They are important, and the implications and the struggles are real. And you'll fill us in on that in a moment. But you won't be surprised, at least, that I live far above these real world issues in the misty puffs of the higher stratosphere. No, but there are.
Goes back to the Mayflower Compact. I mean, you were calling me, you were calling out my patrician roots. I mean, now it's time for me to call out your Mayflower roots.
Well, I will not take that bait for the moment, if I can. We'll see how well I resist, which is going to be a great triumph if I do. But there are issues that I think are tectonic in importance. That are structural, that are really what have drawn my concern for all of the years of the Trump phenomenon, that are involved in this specific issue concerning the tariffs that are far deeper than economic or political even. And they get to the nature and the functioning, the underpinnings of American democracy and the U.S. governmental system. I'm sure I've said countless times to anyone who's listened that the United States system of government, the three branches of government, the separation of powers, the system of multiple levels of checks and balances is all by design to be inefficient, so that no one part of government, no one group or any individual can exercise, frankly, largely unfettered executive authority at any level, with the conscious acceptance that will lead to frequent paralysis and inefficiencies in the execution of policies and decision making. A totalitarian government, a Chinese government, or the Soviet Union had an advantage, any authoritarian state, in some ways, that it can take a decision and then act with consistency, because no opposition is allowed, so that individual rights, group rights, alternative interpretations of fact simply are steamrolled or pushed aside. The American system has been that is not the case, must not be the case. And here the Republicans have now the dominant branch of the Republican Party at present, and for 40 years the Republican Party have been arguing that the inefficiencies are no longer acceptable, and not that they ever were, and that you have to have an executive with the power to act as he or she thinks is in the public interest. It doesn't matter what the Supreme Court says about the law. I'm being a little reductionist, but not too much. It doesn't matter what Congress and its minority mates say, and it doesn't really matter even what minority rights enshrined by law may be protected, that the executive may act in the national interest as he sees fit. So with the tariffs, that's essentially the argument underpinning Trump's policies, that I think it makes sense. Whether it does or not is immaterial, really, to this larger issue. I think it makes sense, and so I will do it. And to oppose me is to oppose the will of the executive, who is authorized and empowered to act on behalf of the nation. Now, I've said before, this is clearly, truly, and I'm not engaging in hyperbole, a fascistic form of government. But one can argue in favor of that. I find that
Glenn,
existentially appalling.
to very quickly draw attention to a podcast we did together in which we dived into the theory of the unitary executive, which you've talked about in the past. There's a whole podcast which you can follow where we examine this trend and this trend towards authoritarianism in some ways has also come because of legislative gridlock. It's really difficult to pass legislation, not just America, but many democracies. I was speaking about it 2 days ago, just before I flew out from Washington, D.C. to California. I am in California today. And this drift towards authoritarianism, you can see all the way from places like India and Turkey to you can argue even France and the US, because you have this a section of public opinion wanting a strong leader, Napoleon-like leader, pushing through much-needed reforms quickly. Over to you, Glenn.
Yeah. So now the implications of this are not just ethereal, as I was being facetious about a moment ago. They're real world, and they are political, institutional, social, economic. They affect all levels of the society, down to the level of the individual in a small town. The moment, this is literally to the day that President Trump was inaugurated for a second term, initiatives that my small town here in Massachusetts of 15,000 people, had voted to enact concerning energy use and public contracts and so on, were stopped dead. Although the town had voted on specific issues, I won't get into the local politics of my town in too much detail, had voted 5 times to do the various steps that I'm alluding to, and they were all stopped because of the assertion of executive power that President Trump has made. So the implications for the American system of government and American society extend exponentially beyond the real consequences. I'm not dismissing their importance, of the effects of tariffs on trade policy, on government budget deficits or surpluses, on business decisions anywhere from Detroit to Silicon Valley to a local grocery store to a factory in Guangzhou and so on. So that is where I think the deepest importance of this issue lies, most of which is obscured because it doesn't seem to affect day-to-day events unless one is involved in public local politics, as I have been here in my home, or has to make a business decision on whether to buy a foreign product or not. And those levels rightfully receive the current attention of the public and of pundits, and you can explain to us why they have real world implications too, Atul. But I wanted to lay out what I think is really an historically significant issue that is not appreciated because it doesn't seem to affect you immediately.
It's very importantly, I'll talk about what constitutional lawyers have been saying and political philosophers have been saying. And number one, we have a separation of powers, which Glenn talked about, that is predicated on this idea that there's no one person or no one institution should have too much power. And the Supreme Court judgment very clearly says the president simply does not have the power to launch tariffs. This is Congress power. And so they've gone back to major questions doctrine, that executive agencies cannot take away power from the Congress. This was so far used by a conservative court to trim the power of the federal bureaucracy. Now, finally, it has come to stop the president himself. Now, that's number one. Number two, what this has done is that it has shown that the Supreme Court is not entirely a handmaiden of the executive yet, despite the increasingly partisan nature of the court, despite the fact that now increasingly no one says anything because no one wants to be balked. Sorry. There was a Supreme Court nominee who ages ago, and Glenn will remember him, Robert Bork, who said something about being on the Supreme Court being an intellectual feast and not getting through. And then no one now says anything and wants to hew to an anodyne set of comments and have their partisan support to get through. So that it has shown that despite all of that decline, the Supreme Court can still stir. So American democracy still has checks and balances. And three, now we get onto the real world stuff. The ruling and the reaction of Donald Trump thereafter has provoked some sort of a mini crisis, both the constitutional and economic crisis. Constitutional, what does the court do if the executive doesn't listen to the court? After all, someone said that how many battalions does a pope have? And the judiciary doesn't really have people under its command with guns to enforce its orders. The executive enforces the judiciary's orders, and a judiciary is a modern day priesthood, really, in many ways. So that is one. The other is, of course, the economic challenge. Now that we have this judgment, and the Supreme Court has said so, but Trump has announced, he had announced tariffs under, I won't drown you in detail, under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, to declare a national emergency over the US trade deficit. Now, these tariffs were then challenged, and now the IEEPA tariffs no longer hold. And an estimated $200 billion paid on imports have to be refunded. In practice, will they be? How will the companies get it? They now have to go to court. If they get it, then consumer lawyers get in and they will say, well, the companies have got the money now. The money should flow to the consumers. There's even more uncertainty. Now, what Trump has said in response to the judgment is he has no intention of foregoing tariffs as a principle and as a practical measure of trade and economic policy. He said that, well, there are other alternatives. And he's quoted the dissenting opinion of authored by Supreme Court Justice John Kavanaugh. Remember, it was a 6-3 decision. And John Kavanaugh said that the decision might not substantially constrain a president's ability to order tariffs going forward. That is because numerous other federal statutes authorize the president to impose tariffs and might justify most, if not all, of the tariffs at issue in this case. So the Trump administration indeed has multiple alternative legal options to IEEPA tariffs. So Section 122 of the 1974 Trade Act permits the administration to temporarily impose import restrictions due to balance of payments difficulties, including tariffs for up to 150 days. Trump has already announced that there'd be a global tariff on 10%. On February 21st, on 21st February, he increased global tariffs to 15%. So other sections also of the same act allow temporary tariffs or quotas if imports cause serious injury to U.S. industries or if countries engage in unfair trading practices. So basically, in a nutshell, Trump could work around. Trump could, of course, ignore the ruling. Then what happens? The customs could still collect tariffs. Then, of course, the issue of the money being repaid, because everyone is now lining up to have lawsuits. Politically, a number of our sources on Capitol Hill, or rather my sources, because Glenn is now living north of here, or north of Washington, they were very happy, including Republicans. They thought that, well, the White House has wrested a lot of power away from Congress, and this decision restores some institutional balance in Washington. Well, that may be so, but one of the important things that Glenn and I have talked about, that the original aims of the new tariffs to cut the US trade deficit simply has not materialized. The tariffs have not managed to cut down the trade deficit. They have been inflationary, though so far not as much as some people expected. But as Glenn has pointed out many a time, that it takes about a year for there's a lag effect, and what has happened after this ruling is that the uncertainty, in a nutshell, associated with the Trump administration's tariff and trade policy actually goes up. It is even more uncertain, and basically the Trump administration will maintain and extend its already extensive use of tariffs as a trade policy tool, and we've heard that from the horse's mouth in the State of the Union address. Now, moving on to a new Iran-US conflict.
The last, if I pardon me for jumping in, Atul, the last thing I'll say on this is that higher tariffs, lower tariffs, systems will adjust to either. The unitary theory of executive power, or the separation of powers, the economy will adjust to either. There are one way or one version, different permutations will be superior to others. But with stability, at least will come the ability for businesses and economic actors to plan and then act. And this has simply continued what fundamentally is the chaos and dysfunction of the executive running the economy. In this case, we're talking about the economy. So even though it is a blow by the Supreme Court in favor of the separation of powers system of the United States, the consequences, in particular by the reaction of the White House, carries on or continues the instability of the decision-making and policy process, which will contribute long-term to the undermining of the American economy.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.